Hello to our retailers and allied industries. This is JT Solis, co-founder and CEO of Miami, Philippines, and welcome to Let's Talk Retail, one of the Philippine Retailers Association's successful digital initiatives. I'm really thrilled to be your host today as we will be tackling one, if not the most talked about topic in all sectors, which is e-commerce. Today, we will find out the state of e-commerce in Southeast Asia, its transformational changes within the APAC region, e-commerce affecting the consumer behavior, and a whole lot more. But before we proceed with our stimulating discussion, would like to thank all the viewers of Let's Talk Retail. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to provide you relevant, up-to-date, and inspirational conversations with the key movers and shakers in the industry. We hope that in our own very way, we were able to help uplift your spirits and provide guidance as you continue to navigate in this new digital normal. Having said that, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. If you like this video, give a thumbs up and share with your colleagues and click the notification bell to receive timely update. Now, let's meet our guests. I have the pleasure and honor to introduce one of the most passionate movers of e-commerce in Southeast Asia. He's an associate partner with Mckinsey implementation and an expert in e-commerce. He works with consumer or retail companies to build online businesses, from concept design and planning to rapid pilots and scale up. He is also very passionate about unlocking growth and nurturing local capabilities. He co-leads the office recruiting and talent development effort. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure and honor to welcome with us in today's episode of Let's Talk Retail, Sarabjit Singh. Sarab?
Hi, JT. How are you?
All good, all good. Calling all the way from Manila. Sarab, thank you for joining us in this conversation this afternoon. Let's Talk Retail. Let's get the ball rolling. We know that Southeast Asia is at the epicenter of a lot of changes, particularly in e-commerce, which is an exploding terrain right now. Please share with us, what are the prospects for growth of e-commerce in Southeast Asia? And what are the emerging, markets' role? And what is e-commerce role in this kind of a market that it's going to play in the future?
Oh, that's a loaded question to start with. I'll just echo what you said in the beginning. This is by far one of the most exciting times for e-commerce. And if you think of where we are in the region, this truly is one of the most exciting places to be in the world. For the e-commerce story in Southeast Asia, let's talk about it in two parts. Let's see how far we have come, and then let's look to the future where we go. For the first part, looking back over the last 5 years or so, e-commerce penetration in the region has grown from just about 1 to 2% of the retail sector in 2016 to more than 10% now. And in markets like Indonesia, it's even touching 20%. This growth's been fascinating. It's been helped along by underlying demand factors like internet penetration, smartphone usage, adoption of mobile wallets, all of which are slow trends that have moved along. But what's really given this growth inflection or a big jump is supply. We've seen so many players enter the market in this period, all of them vying for customer mindshare. And that's where we've seen the big jump and excitement. And if we look empirically, if we go back to the market which leads the world in e-commerce in China, that's where e-commerce had grown in 2010 when Tmall, JD, Taobao all had started by then. Then came the wave in India around 2015 or so. By then, Flipkart, Snapdeal, and Amazon had started. So we really see when there's 2 or 3 big players that are competing against each other, that's when the excitement really begins. And that's what's happened in Southeast Asia. We've got Shopee and Lazada, really big players leading the landscape and defining the boundaries of e-commerce. And then we've got new players, Tokopedia in Indonesia, Tiki and Sendo in Vietnam, all of which really pushing hard to make e-commerce more accessible to consumers. So that means by the time COVID came, the region was already ripe for that inflection, and COVID gave it that push. And now if we look forward, the last year has been fascinating. E-commerce, if you look at the trend growth in these 2 years, we've jumped what we would normally have done in 2 years. So we are in 2020, when we finished 2020, we were projecting where we got to would have been possible in 2022. So that's a big jump that has happened. And then if you look forward, my view is we're just at the beginning. I think there's another 5 to 10 years of solid growth in this sector. Look, the fundamentals in the region are strong. The penetration, as much as it has grown, still lags far behind China. Other enablers, such as financial inclusion, digital payments, all of them have room to grow. In Philippines, for example, 70% of the population is still unbanked. In the next few years, they will have bank accounts. As they get bank accounts, they will be more open to transacting online, and e-commerce is just a natural area then for them to do that. So I feel pretty confident that e-commerce growth story is still in its early days.
Sarab, you've mentioned a lot of key players, movers and shakers, right? You've mentioned the likes of Flipkart, you've mentioned the likes of JD, of course, Amazon, right? Kind of like inspiring a lot of these players. Blibli and Tokopedia, of course, some of the biggest players in Indonesia, also in Southeast Asia. A lot of people actually think that there's a strict dichotomy between online retail players and marketplaces versus brick and mortar retailers, right? In this new digital age, right? New digital normal shaping up. Do you really see a dichotomy between those two, right? And from your perspective in Mckinsey, right? Is e-commerce really taking over the brick and mortar stores as we know them?
Good question. So in the immediate short term, if you look at the last year, for sure, physical retail has suffered. People's needs still need to be fulfilled, and e-commerce has benefited as a result. So if you look at it from a very short time perspective, you may see this as a zero-sum game. But that's the short term. I do not think in the longer term, you can say that e-commerce growth can only happen at the expense of brick and mortar. I'll give a couple of data points why I believe that. First is, in countries such as Indonesia, if you look at physical retail space, there's still room to grow. So Indonesia, for example, has 1 square feet of retail space per capita versus 3 in China. For sure, COVID has depressed the sentiment around physical retail, but given the broader economic prospects, you could argue that there's still room for growth. The second is, as COVID scales down, people will be back in offline channels. For sure, if you see in the last year, whenever we have seen in the region countries relaxing restrictions, there's been a rush out to people dining out, spending more time outside because they crave that social experience. In surveys, again, referring to a survey in Philippines that McKinsey did, the net intent to continue shopping online for customers drops by 18% after COVID, suggesting many of them do want to return to physical trade. What will be different, though, is that the nature of that physical retail will be different. We can talk about it later, but this theme of omnichannel has come up. We've talked about it for many years now. But whereas before, omnichannel was the kind of coexistence of online and offline, now omnichannel is about the integrated existence. So brick and mortar stores will have a future for sure, but they will not exist in a separate world. They will be much more integrated into a seamless digital experience.
That's good. That's good. I think that's a very good insight, Sarab. One of the things we've been observing, and a lot of the analysts have been observing, is a regional adoption of the different best practices, right? And benchmarking when it comes to cross-country practices. And I was wondering, could you cite a country, for instance, Southeast Asian country, with regard to e-commerce best practices that have been adopted, that have been benchmarked against by their Southeast Asian neighbors, and from which we could learn moving forward in this new digital normal?
Yeah. So e-commerce in Southeast Asia has been a success story for the whole region. Every country has seen a boom, but if the question is only one, let's take the example of Thailand. Thailand's a fascinating country. It has seen 50+% e-commerce growth every year for the last 3 years. And I think that offers a good case study. And I'll talk about 5 success factors, which really has gotten Thailand there. The first is demand. It's a healthy set of demand drivers. The upper middle class of the country has grown to nearly quarter of the population. And that continues to drive a huge growth in household spending. This population is very digitally connected. Last year, the country ranked 4th in the world in electronic account-to-account payments behind China, India, and South Korea. So all these are good drivers for e-commerce. The second is supply. There's a growing ecosystem of players, Shopee and Lazada, of course, being the biggest, but there's many other physical retailers, Watson's, a central group that have jumped into the mix and set up their online stores. You've got C2C channels, which are growing. You've got Facebook and Line. So that competition of supply is also a very big driver in e-commerce demand, and there's more and more of that supply in Thailand. A third is success factors enablers. Enablers are all the other players other than demand and supply that are driving adoption. So logistics companies that are helping to sell brands online. Thailand has recently had its first unicorn, Flash Express, a company that started less than 5 years ago that has grown on the back of this e-commerce demand. You've got companies doing online store setup, management, marketing, analytics. So that enabler ecosystem helps. The fourth success factor is just social. The number of social media users in Thailand is 80% of the entire population or more. And that's hugely synergistic for e-commerce, because as people spend more time online, after COVID came, it's only natural then for them to go from just spending their lives online to also spending their money online. And a fifth success factor is government policies. So even back in 2016, the government had set up a National Digital Economic Committee to coordinate policies. Now they have a plan called Thailand 4.0. And all of that sends a signal to the market that the country is open for e-commerce.
That's a good one, Sarab. You've moved from micro elements in terms of supply and demand going towards macro enabling elements, the role of enablers, other players, and also the role of the state, right, and the public sector in actually cultivating this kind of a thriving ecosystem. Now, to hone in terms of the demand side, Sarab, right, the consumer behavior. Could you pinpoint what are some of those customer experience trends that you're seeing right now, right? And how is COVID-19 still shaping it into the kind of a customer experience that we can foresee taking over in the very near future?
Yeah. So COVID has been hugely transformative to how customers shop, and more particularly how customers shop online. I'll talk about three trends. First is e-commerce is becoming more and more part of the daily customer needs. So when Lazada started, it's been a decade since they did, the category dominated at the beginning was electronics. These were big purchases. You'd buy a mobile phone every now and then, but for your day-to-day purchases, you would still go to the grocery store. Now, online purchases have become more frequent, and the average order value has dropped to as little as $10. And it continues to do so. And that suggests that smaller basket size means people are increasingly relying on online for their day-to-day needs. So that's one. Second is, I mentioned social briefly earlier. Customers are increasingly relying on social commerce to make purchase decisions. In many of our countries, again, when we did the interview, well over 3/4 of customers say that they are buying more on or with the help of social media than they were before. What COVID has done is it has kept people indoors. So whereas you could previously go out, touch and feel a product and decide if it's the right one for you, you can't do that now. So you look for independent viewpoints, you look for influencers, you look for affiliates, and hence the growth of models like community via live streaming. And for the brands, it's very important. It's complicates the relationship because a brand could early just sell to you directly, but now brands have to work harder because a direct connection is missing to sell to you through affiliates or influencers. Maybe a third point, which COVID has changed and I think will be part of consumer behavior going forward is online and offline are no longer separate customer journeys. The theme of omnichannel now means that a user could be standing in an electronics store and reading the reviews of the products in front of them online. So there's a lot more to talk about this point, but it really, this omni-channel and customer behavior is a key change that COVID has driven.
Mm-hmm. In terms of this omni-channel, just to build on that point, Sarab, right? You're talking about a merging of the path to purchase, an elevated and an augmented customer experience, right? Could you briefly touch on this omni-channel experience? Because a lot of our retailers are actually just going to have this resounding question: where do we play now, and how do we win? Now that you've mentioned the omni-channel strategy, is this the way to go?
So yes, the short answer is this is the way to go. Until a few years ago, a retailer being omni-channel would mean maybe they have a store online, but there was no connection between the products available online versus on the store. The backend systems were different. Inventory management was different. The user experience was different. That's very difficult to do now when customers are, like I said, standing in the store and looking at your online store. So you need to streamline that whole experience. Let's take apparel and fashion, for example. It was one of the earliest categories in e-commerce, but after COVID hit, the physical retail has suffered. And what has happened is this is a category that a lot of customers want to try, but they can't. So what stores are experimenting on is with virtual try-on technologies using augmented reality, computer vision technology, so users can see how stuff looks on them when they wear it. Another data point that comes to mind is Shopify, which is a platform that has helped a lot of SMEs set up online stores. It allowed merchants to add 3D models to their product pages. And when it did, they found that conversion rates for those products which have those 3D models so you can give a better experience increased by 250%. So the more real of an experience you can give to users online, at the same time, the more digital an experience you can give to users offline, the better it would be.
Sarah, we all know that Southeast Asia isn't a monolithic region, right? There are definitely different dynamics across every single Southeast Asian country. So what are those emerging markets that you see now in Southeast Asia, and where do you see those pockets of growth?
Jerry, that's definitely true. It's definitely not a monolithic region, and that's perhaps one of the mistakes that people make when looking at it from the outside. They think China is huge, Southeast Asia is huge, Southeast Asia should learn from China. Well, there's a lot we can learn from China, but the region itself has countries with very different economic levels, different languages, different cultures, different consumer behaviors, and that needs to be acknowledged. That makes it challenging, but also more fascinating. Now, if you break this down, we can take three broad categories of markets. Category one are markets like Singapore and Malaysia, where they're relatively a little bit more developed. E-commerce growth is expected to be between 10 to 20% per year in the next few years. These economies have better infrastructure for logistics. So there, the e-commerce growth will be about how can you deliver even better, more sophisticated customer experiences online. Category two is really where the meat of growth for e-commerce is. It's the four countries of Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines that will together drive nearly 75% of the total e-commerce growth in the region over the next few years. There's many underlying factors for this. A simple one is that these are the most populous countries in the region. So the fundamentals of demand are there. A more nuanced growth driver is that the share of traditional trades in these markets is higher, which creates a leapfrogging opportunity where consumers go straight from wet market to online versus category one, where modern trade is more dominant. Net, it's these four countries that are attracting the lion's share of interest and investment. Keep in mind what I said earlier, though, is within these four as well, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, different languages, different customer behaviors. So you still need local winning value propositions. Then we come to category three, which are the frontier markets of Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. All much smaller economically, very fast growing, no doubt, but they all also have significant internal challenges that they will need to resolve before they can come out of the shadows.
Wow, those three categories is something really worth noting for a lot of our entrepreneurs, traditional and even modern e-tailers, right? Sarah, we all know that COVID has impacted a lot of these countries, right? And riding on the similar logic that Southeast Asia isn't a monolithic region, obviously COVID and the pandemic has affected certain sectors of the economy more than others. Some have been affected more adversely, even vis-a-vis others, right? And one specific segment a lot of people have been talking about is these small companies, the medium, small, and micro, small, and medium enterprises segment, right? So, give us a couple of ideas and insights on this one. How is COVID affecting this particular segment of the economy, right? And how can we cushion them and allow them to adopt, right, to the future?
Yeah, it's a very important topic. MSMEs are really the foundation, the platform of economic growth in a lot of these countries. These are the companies that are driving growth. They're also the ones that are pulling people out of poverty and helping them grow. The good news is that e-commerce offers them a good opportunity. It helps them compete on a more equal level with bigger players, but it also has some challenges. So let's look at them one by one. First, on the good news. What e-commerce has done is it has democratized retail. It has allowed brands to go direct to consumer or D2C. And by doing that, it has cut out the inefficiencies in offline supply chains, which often were advantageous to bigger companies disproportionately who could afford having those big distributor partnerships. But with e-commerce allowing companies to speak directly to their customers online, that opens a door for MSMEs, especially for MSMEs that are more digitally savvy. This is a tremendous unlock. A second impact comes from social. Traditional retail required a lot of media spending, both above the marketing, spending in brand investments, especially in store marketing, to speak to the customer. So you needed partnerships with convenience stores, with hypermarkets, with general trade to just get your message out there. But with social, that's changed the game. Marketing spend is still important, but if you have a compelling product or service that can drive word of mouth, you can cut through that clutter. And no matter your size, the return on that marketing spend can be much higher. So that's also advantages to MSMEs. A third benefit is the emphasis of governments and big e-commerce platforms to bring more MSMEs online. In Philippines, for example, Shopee claims to have supported over 300,000 local MSMEs, and that's a fact that even the government celebrates. The big platforms are doing so, working with the government bodies to set up educational tools to help these sellers get to know how to sell more online. So all that is to the benefit of MSMEs. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is selling online is a much more complex world. Many more variables, very fast moving, much more dynamic, and small entrepreneurs who don't have that digital background may get overwhelmed and also confused by how many options that exist. So keeping that in mind, the success there for MSMEs really is about just getting started somewhere. You will not have everything to begin at the start, but you will learn along the way.
Learning along the way. That is a very good remark, Sarab. Maybe as we wrap up this discussion, particularly in this exploding terrain of e-commerce, Sarab, I know for the benefit of our audience, retailers across the world listening to us across time zones, any last couple of tips for our retailers on how do they future-proof their business? How do they evolve amidst evolving times, right? And, what are their specific tactics that they can already undertake moving forward?
It's a good question, JT. I'll end with maybe 3 tips or 3 success factors that I think retailers need to succeed online. Retailers and brands, anybody who's selling online. The number one is specifically important for this region, which is successful e-commerce players need to deliver value for money. The region we are in has very high income inequalities. There's a small market for luxury, and no doubt that market is growing, but the majority of customers are price conscious. Now, that doesn't mean they want cheap stuff. What they're looking for is value for money, good quality products at prices that fit within their budget. A good example of this is in the beauty sector, where one of the fastest growing categories is prestige, which are mid-range products priced slightly higher than the mass range, but promise high quality. Many of these beauty products are being marketed as dermatological products even. So deliver value at a good price and you have a good chance of winning customers. On the other hand, or of either side of this equation, either you compromise quality just to get a cheap price, or you price something out of the customer's price range, you'll have a difficult time winning. So that's success factor number one. The second factor is about getting to know your customers, who they are, what do they like, what's their behavior, and connecting with them. One of the downsides of e-commerce growth, especially the marketplace model, has been the disaggregation of the relationship between the customer and the brand. Because the marketplace holds the data, the brand doesn't know as much about the customer as they would if they have to sell direct. So brands are having to work harder to connect with their customers. And those that do so have a good chance of winning. So the strategies here include working with e-commerce channels to collect customer data, understand purchase preferences, use social media to engage customers, not just in the moment when they want to buy, but also when they're doing other things in their life which are relevant for you. So if you're a beauty brand, be with them, not just in the moment to sell a product, but help them understand what are the right beauty products for them. Another example is the moment when customers open their package. That's a very important part, a very physical part of the e-commerce purchase experience. You delight the customer then, and then give them a voucher, make them come back to you, and you've got a good chance of getting them hooked onto your brand. So the second thing then is about connecting with your customers. And the third success factor, which is very important, is data. E-commerce is a much more complex channel than physical retail, many more variables, a lot more dynamic. If companies are not careful, they risk sinking a lot of investment in this channel without seeing good results or even understanding what happened to this investment. Let's take marketing, for example. Costs such as customer acquisition and retention are often the biggest components of online operating costs, and they'll be different for every brand, channel, target customer segment. The only way players can get a handle on these costs is through data. So track every marketing dollar you're spending, how much traffic is coming to your website and your channels, what does the funnel look like, and use that data to make better decisions. Ultimately, that will help you to become more successful online and your business. And I'll just repeat that last sentence, you can cut later. Ultimately, doing so will help to, sorry guys, this is the end. Ultimately, doing so will make it easier for you to allocate your marketing spend online and help you grow.
There you have it. That was Sarabjit Singh, Associate Partner at Mckinsey and Company. So those three things, right? The first one is value for money, connecting with your customers, and of course, being a very, very data-driven company as you navigate your business, your brand, your retail firm in this very volatile world. Thank you so much, Sarab, for giving a lot of those insights and for co-navigating with me this value-laden conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise on this topic, and thank you for joining us today. Well, that's another enriching conversation in Let's Talk Retail. We hope that you were able to get ideas and strategies that you can use to your respective businesses. Thank you so much. This is JT Solis, and we'll see you in the next episode. Stay safe, stay healthy.